So now let us look at statement 18. So statement 18, the statement itself is translated as all the upholders of tenets are dogmatists. All the upholders of tenets are dogmatists. So here a little bit of background again. So tenets are systems. Necessarily, tenets are systems. They are organized systems of thought. You could say that they are kind of philosophical traditions. And over time, the development of Buddhism in India got to a point where various Buddhist communities in India, various Buddhist groups in India, became associated with a particular set of doctrine, a particular set of philosophical positions that characterized them. Interestingly, from a historical point of view, it seems that the first significant differences among the early Buddhist community had to do more with differences in terms of how the monastic rules for the monks and nuns, how some of these monastic rules were interpreted. So the earliest evidence of people differentiating themselves, one group against another group, had to do with how they were interpreting certain, what we might see as minor, in fact, certain minor disagreements over monastic observances. So one of the things I remember was over the issue of can salt, again, you might think it's minor, but it was significant enough that people felt that, well, I can't, live in the same monastic kind of boundary as you. Why? Because some had the opinion that even something like salt cannot be kept. So keeping in mind that in the early community, there were no monastic kitchens. Every monastic community, whether they had a building or not, because some, didn't necessarily live in buildings, but any monastic community, so each monastic community is defined by the limits of the monastic boundary. So within this boundary, so remembering that the early community went on alms rounds, right? They gained their food, daily sustenance, by walking into town and getting food put into their bowls, donated to them. So then there is this question of salt, which is what you might add to your food. If there is like extra salt from today's bagging, so to say, can that salt be kept within the monastic boundary for use tomorrow or day after or a week later? Because salt, you can keep. So basically one group said, no, you can't do that. Everything, every day that you eat has to be from what you received this morning. And once this meal is finished, anything that we got from this meal, that has to be taken away. Maybe fed to stray dogs or given to others, but we are not allowed to store up anything. So that was apparently one of the disagreements that led to two groups separating. Now, when we say separating, we also should not think that they were necessarily fighting. I think one way to just see this as basically saying, well, it's too much confusion and disharmony if within the same boundary, some of you say we can keep salt and some of you say we cannot keep salt. So if you want to keep salt, you stay here. If you don't want to keep salt, you go into a different boundary. Then at least, it's clear. No need to fight. And so the earliest differences appears to have been on the basis of minor differences in terms of how the 250 monastic vows of monks and then the 300 something of nuns, how they are interpreted. And that led to the formation of different chapters, they call them nikayas, different chapters of the same. So the fact that they are called chapters, so like chapters of the same book, they all belong to the same book, so to say, but these chapters differ in terms of how they observe these monastic vows. Over time, the issue of differences in monastic vows seem to have given way to differences in terms of philosophy, differences in terms of, you could say, view, differences in terms of their understanding of the Buddha Dharma. What is absolute truth? What is relative truth? So on and so forth. So that by the time of Jigten Sumgön in the 12th century, when Indian Buddhism got transmitted to Tibet, again, by that point, that is when the Nalanda tradition is really kind of dominant in India. Again, I've mentioned this. They say that generally there are four main tenet systems, four main philosophical schools. And the particularists or the Vaibhashikas, and then the followers of Sutra, and then the mind only, Chittamatra, and then the Madhyamaka. For sure, within each of these general four groupings, there were also differences, people having different ideas and different interpretations. And for sure, there were more than four. But just as an overall way of dividing, organizing all these differences, in late Indian Buddhism, they say there are basically these four tenet systems. So when it comes to these four tenet systems, then of course, everybody is saying the way we understand it is the right way. What about the way the others understand it? They won't outright say they are wrong. Most of these groups will not outright say, oh, they are just plain wrong. It's an Indian style of dealing with differences, which is not to say you are plain wrong, but to say you are almost right. Okay? Instead of you are just plain wrong, it's more like you are almost right, but not quite. So you are, and then you are almost right, and you almost right, but not quite. Yes, we are absolutely right. So that's how they dealt with differences, rather than you're wrong, we need to stop you, we need to get rid of you, or burn you, even worse, No, it's just like you got it, but you missed some important things. And so these different positions, and then often, it's actually within one tradition, like the middle way, Madhyamaka. Then among the Madhyamakas, then it is said that some Madhyamaka masters, with regards to relative truth, they say this, and that. And so the well-known division between two groups of Madhyamaka masters, they are called the autonomist, Prasangika, and the autonomist, not Prasangika, Swatantrika, nothing to do with Tantra, even though the name is Swatantrika. And then Prasangika, called consequentialist in English. And these are the translations, that there are these two major groups. Then, as again I mentioned before, actually their disagreement is not in what is ultimate truth. Their disagreement is, how do you talk about relative truth? It's not even necessarily in what do you think relative truth is. It's how is it skillful or not skillful to talk about, to express relative truth. So the Swatantric is among the middle way school, among the Madhyamaka. In brief, basically what they say is, you need to make certain statements about relative truths, which are valid, which are invalid, in what ways they are valid, in what ways they are invalid. They say, so they are called autonomous, meaning you make autonomous statements about the status of the various relative phenomena. Consequentialists are those who say, no, you don't do that. And then, so if you don't do that, then what do you do with relative truth? Well, they say, the consequentialists say, no, whatever people say it is, we just accept that. When they say we just accept that, they don't mean we accept whatever people say about relative truth, we accept as true. No, what they mean by we accept is simply to say, whatever people assert to be relative, we tentatively accept. We say, okay, sure. Now, if you say that this thing is true in the relative way, in this way, have you considered that, given what you say, the consequence of saying that is this, and the consequence of this is this, and the consequence of this is this, and this, and this, and they say, before long, it will lead to an absurd conclusion. And in that way, you don't even need to state any kind of relative truth or express it, because any attempts to express it is flawed. So you should just, so famously, I think Chandakirti says, the Buddha has no quarrels with the world. Whatever people assert to be true, the Buddha is willing to entertain them and say, yeah, sure, you say that is true, okay, sure. But you want to know more? Let me ask you some questions. If that is true, then wouldn't it entail consequence also? Wouldn't it entail? Wouldn't it mean, therefore, this is also true? And if this is true, wouldn't that mean this? Wouldn't the implication be this? Wouldn't the implication be this? And then again, before long, it leads to an absurd position. And so they are consequentialists that way. Anyway, so there are all these different tenets. Then even among consequentialists, right? Of course, we are human beings. Eventually, there are different types of consequentialists. So with regards to all of this, so again, in the 12th century, in Kyopa's time, Tibetans are starting to get good, at learning about all these different systems, all these different tenets. Mostly they're studying Buddhist systems, Buddhist tenets. Here and there, in some textbooks they receive from India, there is mention of non-Buddhist systems and non-Buddhist tenets. And to that degree, some of them even studied that. And then in the context of studying these tenets, these systems, the emphasis is to refute. Refute meaning to see how each of them are flawed and in what way they are flawed or limited. So the Vaibhashikas, the particularists, they are flawed. Their understanding is flawed in this way, this way, this way, this way. Then the followers of Sutra tenet system, their understanding is flawed in this way, this way, this way, and this way. Mind only, they are flawed in this way, this way, this way, this way. And all the divisions within mind only, they are also flawed in this way, this way, this way. Inadequate in this way, this way, this way. Then middle way, this way, this way, this way. But ironically, what happens is the consequentialist position. It seems that very soon in Tibet, they would refute until they get to the consequentialist. And they say, the consequentialist position is beyond fault, faultless. No more refuting because nothing is there to refute. In part because they say, consequentialists say, we don't hold any positions with regards to all your claims about relative truth. And since we don't hold any position, we are free from any of the faults of any of the positions. So everybody would end up a consequentialist if you want to appear smart. And so, of course, some are very proud. Yes, we consequentialists. We are free from the consequences because we do not assert any flawed positions. In response to all of that, when hearing about that, so you can just imagine, again, right, that 12th century scenario. People coming to Kyopa, joining his community, wanting to learn from a meditation master. But people still have these debates going on, They still like to talk about, the highest view is this, the highest view is this, the highest view is this, the highest view is this. No, your highest view is not high enough, the further higher view is this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then Kyopa, observing that, says, all those who uphold tenets are necessarily dogmatist. That means, to the degree that you identify with any of the tenet systems, implied here is not so much the lower ones, the so-called lower tenet systems, because nobody is proud of the fact that I'm a holder of the lower. Here is more directed at those who say, we have the highest position, we are beyond all views, we are not dogmatists because we don't hold any positions. Here Kyopa says, all. If you hold on to any, if you identify with any of these systems, then right there, you are a dogmatist. That means you fixate on a particular teaching and turn it into a basis for self, like my way, right? My tradition, my interpretation. That my. So he says, all upholders of tenets are dogmatists. So let's look at Khenpo Kunpal and see how he explains this line. In the present context, the non-Buddhists who mainly assert tenets of permanence or nihilism, so Khenpo Kunpal says, so this is not just talking about Buddhists, but also non-Buddhists. And non-Buddhist positions are either essentialists, here translated as permanent, or nihilists. So all the non-Buddhists who mainly assert tenets of permanence or nihilism. So in our modern times, you could say, those who assert permanence are the theists. Those who assert that there is a God, there is a superpower, there is a inherent intelligence and a plan for everything, and that power, that source is in charge. Nihilist would be materialist, secularist. From the Buddhist perspective, it's nihilist, because there's only this life. Even when you say there's only this life, let's make this life really good for everyone now, good for people that will come later, they are still nihilist because they don't think, any of this have any continuity. So the non-Buddhists who mainly assert tenets of permanence or nihilism, and all the upholders of views of permanence and nihilism are called dogmatists. It is, of course, the case with the non-Buddhist upholders of extreme views. And since even the conceited Buddhists who say that all phenomena exist in the relative reality and do not exist in the ultimate reality, still accept the two extreme views of very subtle permanence and nihilism, they are deluded about the meaning of the two truths. So there is no need to mention other Buddhists with coarser views. It is moreover said in a commentary to the 60 Reasonings, whoever accepts that phenomenal exists in the relative reality holds a view of permanence. When one accepts that phenomena do not exist in the ultimate reality, one holds a view of nihilism. The Sutra on Upholding Basic Virtues says, even if one keeps discipline for a long time, and even if one gives rise to meditative absorption for 10 million eons, if one does not understand the authentic reality, one has not grasped this teaching. The genuine nature is that which is free from all modes of grasping, is unelaborated, and is beyond thoughts and expressions. In this commentary here, Khenpo Kunpal starts by saying, the non-Buddhist traditions of philosophy of tenets, they either fall under the category of the essentialist or eternalist or nihilist. Then going from there, he says, even within the Buddhist family, where people don't generally fall into that nihilist and eternalist extremes, in fact, there are subtle versions of that, of those who say, oh, relative reality exists in this way. And ultimate reality is about things not existing in this way. And therefore, it says here, the genuine nature is that which is free from all modes of grasping, is unelaborated, and is beyond thoughts and expressions. Here, right, I think I would say Khenpo Kunpal, being someone very well trained in all these tenet systems and refutation of tenet systems, right? He's a little bit hesitant, I feel, to go to directly, say, actually, all these tenet systems, even if they might be useful in some ways, right? Obviously, they can be useful. But as long as you identify with one of these, and then particularly if you identify with the highest even, the middle way, the consequentialist middle way, as long as you identify with that, you actually have missed the point. You actually have missed the point. So be careful not to. In the early commentaries, when they talk about this matter, they say, instead of kind of focusing on these tenet systems, who is right, who is wrong, who is right in what way, who is wrong in what way, right? More important is to pay attention to karmic causality. Again, Kyopa's emphasis is, if you want to spend all your energy, if you have that much energy, to kind of think through these things, better to learn about karmic causality and see clearly what kinds of actions that you take lead to what kinds of results. Yeah, so it gives those examples, it tells stories in these early commentaries. To emphasize that, better to do that than to then refute and debate. This is wrong this way, that is wrong that way. Yeah, so statement 19 is related to 18. 19 says, upholders of extreme views also have many virtuous practices. Okay. Now, if you just read 18, right, you would think that, Kyopa has nothing good to say about those who hold extreme views. Not just extreme views. In 18, Kyopa is basically saying, as long as you hold on to any view and say, oh, my tradition is this view, my tradition is that view, and not understand that if the Buddha, and the Buddha did teach about, this view entails this, and that view, that way of understanding are limited in this way and that way. No, the Buddha did point out these things, I mean, not using necessarily terms like, mind only, middle way, particularists, followers of sutra. All these came after the historical Buddha. But if you look at the historical Buddha, he did engage in what you might call debate with others. Yeah, as I said, he used reasoning. But his purpose in doing that is not to get people to come to the conclusion, oh, therefore this view is correct, and I'm a follower of this view. All his reasonings are geared towards people overcoming basic confusion and then overcoming the three poisons that arise from the basic confusion, which is delusion, anger, and attachment, right? So the Buddha used reasoning to help us pacify, to help us drop the poisons, to help us gain antidotes to the poisons. So Buddha did do that, but not in order to set up this view as supreme, that view as inferior, and I have the supreme view, and the rest of you have, inferior views, which is easy to. And it's also this is when you turn what is essentially something to be applied to our own minds, our own hearts, you turn it into a religion. That's why Khenpo Rinpoche always says, the Buddha Dharma is not religion. He always reminds us, He says, the Buddha Dharma is not religion. This is not custom. This is not culture. The Buddha Dharma is that which will free us. Now, I usually will add and say, now the Buddha Dharma interacting with human society, interacting with history, has produced the different types of Buddhisms. So I feel we should also be aware that, yes, of course, there are all these different types of Buddhisms. But don't become Buddhist in the sense of mistakenly thinking, oh, the various Buddhisms, I have to choose. Am I this one or this one or this one or this one? No need to choose that. But what we need to choose, what we need to really develop clarity about is Buddha Dharma. So the function of Buddha Dharma is fundamentally not about the building up of systems, the building up of religion that you have to defend. And in the course of defending that, you have to criticize others. It's like, no, that is not pointless. So he says, so here, in doing that, right, 18, right, when Kyopa says, all upholders of tenets are dogmatists. And then, of course, he says, you would think he has maybe nothing good to say about all these systems. But then he says here, the next line, 19, is very important. It says, even those who are upholders of extreme views, they do indeed practice many types of virtues. He says, don't forget that. So you have to read 18 together with 19. When the Buddha does criticize or point out, your position is flawed or wrong in this way and this way and this way. He's not just doing that, Also, when he recognizes what is beneficial, what is virtuous, what is good, that these other people also have, he says that you continue, that you follow. In fact, we have examples of that in these early stories of the life of the Buddha. So the Buddha, over time, gained many followers. And among them was an important king, right, in the region. This king famously supported the Jains. one of the other spiritual communities, religious communities during the Buddha's time. So the king famously was a patron of this Jain tradition. Now, over time, as the king learned more and more from the Buddha, apparently, according to the Buddhist sources, he took refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, right, and became a lay practitioner. So one of the first questions he asked the Buddha is, he says, I have been supporting these Jain monks and nuns, these Jain ascetics, because the Jains also, like the Buddhist monks and nuns, they also beg for their food daily. So this king said, I've been supporting them up until this point. Now that I'm taken refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha, and become basically a lay Buddhist practitioner, what should I do? Do I stop supporting these other ascetics? And Buddha said, no, you cannot. Don't do that. You continue to provide them support, as you have done all this while. Says you can no. He says you continue that. Yeah. And so here, Khenpo Kunpal's commentary. Most non-Buddhist upholders of extreme views also have compassion in their mind streams, whereby they do many virtuous practices such as not killing, not stealing, and so forth. These have a genuinely virtuous aspect and should not be abandoned. Thus, Jigten Sumgen says that concerning the virtuous conduct of the practitioners of other Buddhist traditions, there's no need to mention that we must actively adopt the subtle aspects that are taught in the Vinaya and so forth. So basically here, the point is, Jigten Sumgen says, insofar as, these virtues coming up from compassion, coming up from, you could say, our inherent sense of right and wrong, that we should follow, we should adopt. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he says one of the most impressive things and one of the most important things, he says, that many of us Buddhists should learn, he says, from our Christian brothers and sisters, is their life of service, their generosity to others, their life of service. He says, that's very admirable. He says, we should learn from that. And so this 819 is saying, even though 18, right, is helping us become, 18 addresses, and then, 17, 16, right? They're addressing us how to see clearly, right? What is right and what is wrong. And even within, so-called highest teachings, you should not grasp. You should not let that become a basis for the formation of self, right? So on the one hand, right, there's tremendous emphasis on developing clarity. Right? Like there is a difference between believing that there is such a thing as karma and believing that no, karma is just made up, not true. Khenpo would say, oh, those two positions are very different. The second position is very dangerous. If you think karma is not true, it's made up. Of course, if you think that, the alternative to that is not you should start believing that karma is true, but you should work on seeing how karma is true and develop that understanding. Pay attention. So in terms of that, there is a difference between these two positions, big difference. Right? But that should not blind us from seeing. even as we disagree with each other in terms of these views, there is a lot that we have in common, particularly practices of virtue, kindness, goodness, generosity, patience. That doesn't belong to this religion or that religion. That is, as the Dalai Lama calls it, he says, these are common human values. And he says, and we can all agree on these common human values without needing to invoke. Our scriptures say this, our sutras say that, our Bible say that, our Quran says this, He says, these are common human values. So this is statement 19. Yeah. And so statement 19 kind of is very much related to the next few statements, because after pointing this out, right, Kyopa also has statements to begin to help us see. So the next statement is talking about what is the line between Buddhist practice and non-Buddhist practice. There is a line. So he's not saying, oh, everything is just the same. He's not saying that. Yeah? He says there is a line, and we have to understand where those lines are. And so in that way, we can evolve. Our spiritual maturity can increase. In that way, we can evolve and evolve and evolve. So also need to see where the differences are, while being able to recognize and celebrate, as we say, the common humanity that we all have. Also both things are very important. Otherwise, we become dogmatist, which is the statement in that we looked at. Otherwise, that's how we become dogmatist. We hold on to a dogma. We grasp a dogma. And why we become dogmatists in the end is related to this self-making habit, the creation of self constantly. I, me, mine, I, me, mine. So even if you have given up building self on the basis of your big car, your bank account, your family lineage, your standing in society, your skills, your reputation, your retirement account, even if you have stopped creating self on that basis, you can still be building yourself, your sense of self, your sense of ego on the basis of I'm Buddhist. Then among Buddhists, I am the Vajrayana Buddhist. You guys are just ABC level Buddhist. Then among Vajrayana, we have the highest view. I have the highest Yoga Tantra. You are just practicing the basic things, right? All of that makes us dogmatists. So all upholders of tenets are dogmatists. Guard against that. Thoughts?
Sometimes I found myself thinking, I am a Buddhist practitioner, but then I think that stupid person, or me myself, that stupid person too. So sometimes I think beyond this stupidity, I think there is suffering, there is ignorance, there is, so this helps me to not grasping to my Buddhist identity sometimes.
Yes, yes.
It's
Yeah,
something I
again,
think.
absolutely. And so then the issue is skillful or not skillful. Other places elsewhere I have emphasized, it is important for you to think, wait, I'm Buddhist. I don't, by definition, I don't follow that way. So sometimes, it's skillful to think. It is not skillful when we use that to judge others. But it is skillful when you use that to remind yourself, oh, wait, I have taken refuge, meaning Buddhist, right? You will see in the next statement, it says, the real definition of Buddhist or not Buddhist is, have you taken refuge or not? So it's not about, have you understood all these fancy ideas, emptiness, selflessness, la, 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 It's like, have you taken refuge or not? And then you say, yes, don't forget, I've taken refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha. So I should not take refuge in politics, identity, country, there's that, all those things, And as someone who has taken refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha, I know all the other things are not reliable. So when they fail us, when they disappoint us, not such a big deal. Of course, what do you expect? And so that's when it's skillful to say, I've taken refuge, So I don't do what everybody else does. That's okay, And this is not judging, right? This is just making sure you don't get washed down the same river when the flood comes. Everybody else gets washed down. You need to remember, I'm holding on to the refuge of Buddha Dharma Sangha, so I don't get washed down that river, Then, hopefully, from there we can be useful to others, right? We have refuge. If we remember we have refuge, that means we have that security, meaning we're not washed down by the afflictive emotions. The river, the roaring river of the afflictive emotions is very easy to get washed down. That is when it's skillful to say, not me. I cannot be like that. So you have to be a little bit firm with ourselves, I cannot be like that, I will not be like that. Pull yourself up. Otherwise, all these ups and downs, things go well, I'm Buddhist, yeah. Things go bad, and completely forgot refuge, Anyway, yes.
It also occurs to me that while we have Buddha nature, there is also this innate desire to be with our own tribe, sort of. And that can apply to whether we're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, but it can also apply to the tribe of one versus the other tribe. It's that
yes, of course.
To separate ourselves from those who are not like us.
Yes, of course.
And that is so hard to understand and remember. That
not so hard to understand, just hard to remember.
It's hard to remember, is what to realize what we're doing and how we're using that idea to make ourselves in the world.
Yes, yeah. It's just hard to remember, not hard to understand. I think most of us understand.
We understand it, yeah.
Then we get distracted, That's why what mindfulness really is about, it's not about just breath, breathe in, breathe out. You do all of that so that when you're walking around, you don't get sucked into those habits, those patterns that just reinforce false narratives about self. So we can start by just, trying to remind ourselves, self is merely a process of self-making. My sense of self is only the result of a relentless, continuous, very busy process of self-making. Yeah? Think about that, what that means, all the implications of that. That I have a sense of self, that sense of self is nothing but the result of a continuous, busy, relentless process of self-making from moment to moment to moment to moment. That it's a big job. That knowingly, unknowingly, constantly, we are almost, you could say, the DNA of confusion is always pushing us to maintain this narrative of self. Chanchu sem chorim poche ma ge ba nam ge gyu che ge ba nyam ba me ba yang o ne gong du bel sure. Okay, ta-ta, everybody.